Pat Donegan here, artist formerly known as. I've been talking about some videos about the miracle of three-way swivels, which is something that's really kind of ubiquitous with catfishing and some of the other more bottom-oriented fishing, which, I mean, bass does fall into, but it always amazed me that not just the fact that the bottom is probably the least explored part of musky fishing. I think it really is kind of the last frontier. Not a lot of attention is paid to direct bottom contact. Probably the only thing that really does is bottom valve trolling, and even that really isn't implemented, I think, as often or the way it should be. But even bass fishing doesn't do this. So, but from bass fishing, we get the idea of the Carolina rig. And there's no easier way to do this than with a three-way swivel. Everybody bitches about these three-way swivels. These are built for flathead and blue catfish. They will handle musky just fine. Do not worry. They're great. These are rated for like 150 pounds. So what I like to do with this is I'll tie some leaders up. It's like a 135-pound snap. And I'll just tie some wire leaders where I can make them modular. Just unhook from the three-way swivel, throw it back on. You make them shorter, you make them all kinds of things. But what the whole concept of a Carolina rig is this. The whole concept behind the Carolina rig is getting something down and keeping it there on the bottom, as much of the cast as you can. This comes from the fact that, I mean, quite honestly, historically, trolling was never accepted as a part of bass culture. That's a story in and of itself, Buck Berry. But the result of that was they had to come up with different ways to have bottom contact more often than if they didn't have the advantage of using trolling, where you can just keep the dive curve down indefinitely as long as you've got it behind the boat. So that's when the idea of the Carolina rig came along. Now, most of the time, when people think Carolina rig, they're thinking something like this. If this will fit into the hole. They got a soft plastic, right? And that's a big Magnum craw thinger, my bobber. I put a little blade on the back of. Kind of neat. But they're taking like a weightless or a lightly weighted soft plastic, and they're doing this. One Mississippi, two Mississippi. Hits the bottom, and then you just reel it slow so the weight maintains contact the whole way. Believe it or not, you can catch muskies like this. I grew up doing it out here, and we were bass fishing and we'd run into them. Not an accident. So I've got that bait dragging right on the bottom, right behind the weight, total contact all the way. And that was just a demonstration cast. Here's the funny thing about this, though, to me. Yep, we got weeds. You're using a weight to get a bait down that inherently sinks, right? So, I mean, it's just a matter of time. Eventually, this thing would hit the bottom. Lots of weeds. Patina-like weeds. But what happens when you take something that sinks and use something that floats? This is all about depth, speed, size, action, right? So, let's talk about that. One of the coolest things I ever taught myself to do was the Carolina rig crankbaits. Why would you Carolina rig a crankbait? Because you want to get it down. You don't have to worry about the dive curve. So what you can do with this now, it's a 10-inch jake. This is one of the ones that works pretty well. That a lot of times I'll put a little weight on the front so it rides a little bit more level. But it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to fish like along a break line and hit it, pump it, you kind of want it to sit a little bit more level, so you'll add some weight to the midline to make it sit level. But right now I'm just wanting to kind of go down, stop, rise. So I don't know, it's probably sitting in 18, 20 feet. It's on the bottom. Oh. Let it pause. Hit the bottom. That crankbait is sitting like that. It can sit there as long as I want. Okay, it's cool. Now, the neat thing about that is speed control, because you can have that indefinitely hang right off the bottom like that. And if fish are following it, looking at it, that gives them a chance to really take a little bit of a more gander at it, and then you give them the old heave-ho. And you're just doing those little short strikes on something like that. So that's staying right off the bottom, maybe 2 feet. However long your leader is, its buoyancy is going to keep it up. You can slow reel it too. The jake doesn't do a lot on a slow reel though, so I like to pop it, let it fall. Pop it. And let it fall. And now that thing has been on the bottom all the way back to the boat. And here's the thing, don't think like, oh, you just got to do it with a jig. Dude, every crankbait has a little bit different tendency. So like you see that one, if I'm just reeling that slow and maintaining bottom contact, it's kind of cool that it does that. I might put a tonsil tickler in the back, but more of what I'm getting out of this one is like, pretend that weight's on the bottom. Now you see that bait, it's sitting up off the bottom, what, maybe 2.5 feet? I'll give it a rip, stop, rip, stop. And that's something you can't even really do with trolling, because you can get it down with trolling, but the thing with trolling is you always got to be in motion a little bit, so you're going to lose some of that speed control on the pause. That's where this comes in handy. Let's look at another style of crankbait. So that's when we're going to rip, right? Because even though it's pointed down nose-wise a little bit, because that buoyancy's fighting it, when you do that, if it rides level, if you're fishing more of a flat, you might want to weight it in the middle of some bell sinkers so it'll sit more like this, because you want it to go like this, not like that. I like the nose down when I'm really trying to contact structure. Structure being topography. Here's an Ernie. Now obviously the Ernie's got a steeper dive curve, but it also functions at a slower speed. It's got that nice little drunken stagger to it when you do it. Also, you can send it to Sarajevo if you want. You can change the weights too. I don't like to go over 3 ounces because you lose a little bit of the sensitivity. 2 ounces is usually enough to take something down, even these big musky baits. But I imagine in current, if you're doing this, especially on like a river with some current, this would be a really effective way to fish over that stuff, because that current's going to drive fish more directly into the bottom, being able to maintain that contact. So now I've got an Ernie. But what I'm doing is I'm just reeling this just slow enough, occasionally give it a pull. I'm reeling it just slow enough so literally the weight's on the bottom. I can feel the weight. But I can feel the Ernie diving and actually hitting the bottom too, because that dive curve on that Ernie is so great that even on a slow reel, it's going to keep that weight down a little bit, even though it's buoyant. Once you get it down there with the weight, it wants to stay down. You can give it a little jar. You can fish it a lot like the Jake. It's just going to maintain bottom contact a little bit more. They were coming up off the bottom. And that is one of the best things about doing this when you're fishing in deeper water, when you want to cast, is that the bait will literally stay all the way to the boat, stay on the bottom all the way back to the boat, and then when it comes up, it's coming up like this. It's not coming at the boat, it's coming up to the boat. And a lot of times that is going to be a huge trigger to a fish that's following it. It's an evasion. That's a signal that that thing is evading them. It's what trips their trigger. That's the energy signature, and they're going to come up, and as they see that rising, they're going to come up and smack it, as opposed to if it was just out there and it was doing like one of the regular dive curves. But if you've got one that goes like this, like that ride at Six Flags, the Superman thing that just goes whoop, that's what it's like. Let's look at another style. Because basically the fun thing about this is if it floats, you've got some kind of application for it. So let's look at a bass crank. Now what's cool about this one, as you can see, I beat that up a little bit yesterday. This is a shallow running bass crank. 6 cents. 6 cents makes amazing shit, and it's really good. It's really well priced. Like instead of buy some of these small musky baits, yeah, but you're really missing out if you're not exploring the larger end of the bass spectrum for baits when it comes to these things. They respond to a little bit less resistance most of the time, because most of those small musky baits are designed to be trolled. But when you've got a bait like this, you know, it's not got that steep dive curve, so it's not going like, it's going more lateral like that. So what I like to do with these is this. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll just do a cast just to show you, like, it's not even all about just getting on the bottom. This is a bait that I like the action of, but I can't get it to go down, even if I was trolling, I can't get it to go down 15 feet. If I put on a Carolina rig, all I have to wait is about 3 seconds, and I can get it down about, well, maybe more than that. So now I'm just reeling this through suspended water. Let it sink. Come up, go down. So it's a good way to put an action on a bait that you like, down at a deeper level than you could. Although the real thing to here is bottom contact, but I just wanted to make a cast, honestly, because we got bait fish out here, and I want to see if maybe we get one to eat. But when you've got one that has a lateral presentation like this, palms over Baghdad. What I do with these is you can reel them slow. There, it hit bottom. You can give it that subtle action because those square bills don't take a lot of resistance to engage. So I can feel that thing kind of skimming a little bit over the stuff as the weight drags bottom. But the really cool thing you can do with a square bill, because it's not going to dive down as much, going to dive this way, you can fish it like a jump bait. You let it sit, give it a pull. And when I'm doing that, I'm bringing it a little bit off the bottom. But what's actually happening is I'm bringing the weight off the bottom a little bit. But the bait, even because it has a little bit of an inherent dive curve to it, it's actually going underneath the weight. So even though the bait's here and the weight's here, when it's just sitting still, when I rip it, I rip the weight goes like this, and the bait comes in like this, and then it goes like that. So I get it to come down a little bit, but it's not tagging the bottom. So especially if you're wanting to like skim some structure, you want to go down a break line, but it's got some weeds on it or something, this is a good way to do that. Always fish it all the way back to the boat. Yes, sir. All right. Let's take a look at a couple more. Now, talked about shallow diving bass bait. Let's talk about the miracle of musky fishing. That is bass crankbait, bass crankbaits. Now, the interesting thing about bass is because of the nature of what you would call bass fishing, they don't troll, right? Even though they should and they could. So to get down deep with these baits, and this is something I still can't believe bass guys haven't done this in tournaments yet. I've been doing it for years, and I'm like, keep waiting for somebody to do it, and I'm like, oh, okay. So to get down deep with crankbaits, they had to develop these crankbaits that had these ridiculous dive curves. So things like a 10XD, Livingston Lures makes an amazing one. I think it's called the Howl Runner or something. It's an amazing deep water crank. Rick Clun crank used to make a good one. I got that one on TV with that. But these bass cranks like this, their dive curve is like super steep because bass fishing, they think, they don't have the luxury to troll. So they can't get that dive curve down to a certain depth and keep it there. They have to get that to the bottom as quick as they can. And then it stays in contact, and then it comes up the boat, which is cool for us because it gives us all these neat little tools where we can actually, you know, go through deep timber, twitch deep weed lines and stuff. Really, when you're looking for stuff like that, that's the thing. You look at most musky cranks, and Ernie is a rare exception, but I don't know a lot of people that twitch them. I like to do it. But an Ernie is one of the few musky baits that really has that steep dive curve like a lot of the bass cranks, just because it's made to be trolled so flipping deep. But when you've got a bait like this, even if it dives down real fast, the problem is you've still got the dive curve. And you got to keep it moving a little bit. How do you solve that? I mean, right now we're probably in, I don't know, 25, 30 feet of water. Be off that point a little bit. So one of the things about the whole Buck Perry thing with the spoon plug that he made his bait out of brass for, was back in the time, that was fast, was the fact that if you anchored in a certain amount of water, like less than 8 feet, and you took the big ones, they would stay in contact all the way back to the boat. So you'd sink the crankbait down, you reel it, and it would walk its way all the way back up the structure. Swim plugs are really good for that too. They really still are. But the other thing about it too is I like the speed control of having something with some buoyancy, so I can stop it and then just fall on the thing. I can stop it, let it sit, especially for musky, because bass will hit it like this. Musky might want to follow it and nip it a little bit. So right now this is sitting on the bottom. What I'm doing is I'm working it really slow because I've got that weight in contact, but I can feel that crankbait, even with that subtle pull, it's going tuk, 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 tuk. Now it's let sit and float. You don't want to rip these as much. As you can see right there, I've got bottom contact like right now. That's not the weight. the weight is a smooth pull. This is the crankbait itself walking the bottom in, what, 30 feet? Because when you're starting it down at the bottom, its dive curve is starting from 2 feet above the bottom. So, and then we'll walk it all the way back. So like, especially when you're wanting to maintain constant bottom contact. And dude, bass guys, I don't know what the hell's wrong with y'all. Do this. It's so stupid. It's right there under your nose. Like seriously, instead of having to throw this thing out and crank it down, because y'all ain't gonna troll, I don't know, do this. Problem solved. I just eliminated 45% or 30% of my cast just getting it down to where I want, and then I still might not be able to get it down to where I want. And the whole idea with these crankbaits is to get bottom contact. Boom, I just made bottom contact. And I will have bottom contact with this bait until I get it back to the boat. And you know what? Talk about your speed control. Let's say I want to stop it for a second. I'm keeping tension on that right now, and that bait's just hanging up like this. A lot of fish will get it right there. You can see that nose, look at that. Bass cranks really are a miracle. That thing stayed on the bottom the whole way. Let's talk about one more type of bait. Not type of bait. Let's talk about some of these more shallow diving lateral retrieve musky baits. Like this is a musky mistress. This is a slow rise bait. But it's nice for this kind of thing because it responds to a relatively slow speed. It's not going to dive super deep. Like, you know, you might get it down on a good troll, maybe 12 feet. But you do it like this. And this is a smaller one. You can kind of rip like a jake, but you're going to get a little bit more out of it. The words of Ronnie Millsap, any day now. Thank you. Give it a small pull. You feel that bait kick, 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 kick. Now it's contact. One of the things you really want to do while you're doing this though, is you don't want to leave slack. Like right now, my line is taut against that weight. Why is it taut against that weight? Because if a fish pecks that on the back hook, I want to be able to haul into it. So one disadvantage is you lose a little bit of sensitivity. You notice I got my finger on that line. I'm telling you guys, the bottom is like, the bottom in many ways is unexplored, if not less explored than open water fish, so to speak. And all your open water fish are still going to be relating to things off the bottom. Their dictation where they suspend is always dictated by the topography. Let's take a look at one more, and as you can see, that's basically what it's doing on the bottom when I slow reel it. When I rip it, when I give it a pull, you know, it sees like kind of in line with the weight instead of going underneath it. So when I give it a pull, it lines up with the weight, and then it sits. So when you're doing that, that bait is going to basically skim over the bottom. Instead of digging down, it's going to line up with the weight, and it's going to go right with it and then right back down. So you're never going to be too far off the bottom, but then this bait's still going to skim it. It's going to stay down there. Let's talk about one more thing. I'm literally doing this just to be stupid, but what do I like about this bait? It's a topwater bait, but it spins really slow. That thing does something that none of these other baits do at a super slow speed, which is have animation. That's actually really dope. So And now it is my life quest. I've never caught a muskie doing this, but now this is going to be my project because I know it'll work. The other stuff, I've caught muskies on those types of cranks doing this. So now you've got a floating bait juxtaposed with a weight. But the cool thing about this is as much as I reel it slow, maintain contact with the bottom, and I keep that weight down there, yeah, it's just not, that little tail is still spinning. Which is kind of nice because a lot of times down deep those fish are really, they're not active. So they might not go for something. If you rip it past them at the right speed at the right time, they might. But think about, I mean, it sounds stupid, but one of the best things to probably Carolina rig in this fashion is probably a topwater. Because they'll stay right above the bottom. And the fish don't know that's, you know, meant for a topwater. They don't know what the hell that is. And all that thing does is just spin. Stay right behind it. And you can see right there, that's a simulation of what's going on underneath the water. So even when I spin that super slow and I'm just barely reeling it, that little prop is putting off a little bit of stimulus. And I'm 100% convinced that that will work. But you gotta look like an idiot before you look like a genius, so. It's kind of the way things work. But yeah, that's the deal with Carolina rigs. Fun with three-way swivels. Man, don't get into that box where you're like, this works. Let me tell you something. Everything works. As soon as it enters the water, it's code. At some point, anything you do will sync up with the activity level of these things and you can get them to respond to it. Like, dude, like Jerry Borst gave me a lure one time that he made a rock. It was just a piece of shale. And he put a hook on it, and he showed me all the walleyes and bass he'd caught on it, and caught a couple muskie. Because all you do is ripping it through the water, and then it would flutter down like this. Like, they don't know. They don't know what's real. Like, if they hit that shit, then they'll hit a rock. They'll hit anything. It has nothing to do with the bait. It has to do with what you do with the bait. It makes a difference. You're the key component. I think people give baits way too much credit, and themselves not enough. Because it's always about the bait. And it's like, well, yeah, but you were doing... The bait just allowed you to do the correct thing at the correct time. It was not the bait doing it. It was you doing it with the bait. So once you kind of get that shift in your head, like the possibilities kind of open up. Because then you start playing around with different stimulus. Like you don't look at baits like this is this for this and that. And oh, you got to troll this. So that is going to be my new mission. I'm going to catch a Carolina rig topwater fish. Watch me. And it will work. Because it's a combination of depth, speed, size, action, sound, color. That's how you figure out things that'll work. Don't be looking for everybody else to tell you what to do. Think that Buck Perry stuff. That's why I keep talking about them. It's not some weird, you know, kink thing or I don't know. Like, I don't know why people think I keep talking about it, except the fact that everything goes back to Buck. But that's what I'm talking about when I talk about them. It's like, said every success and every failure is related back to depth, speed, size, action, sound, color. I switch it because I disagree with the action color order that he had. But and you think in those terms, literally every door opens. There's no longer musky fishing or bass fishing or crappie fishing. Well, it's all about these fish respond to conditions in specific ways. They respond to different stimulus in different ways. They're the same fish. They're the same fish here as they are in Canada, as they were anywhere that they can live. It's not a different animal where you go. It's like I tell people, so many guys that go to a new lake, why Buck Perry is just so important. They'll go to a new lake and they act like they're learning a new language. I'm like, guys, when you pick up a new book, do you have to learn a new language to read the book? No, you don't. That's what's so important about Buck, is knowing the language of this water and these ecosystems and what's making all of this work and how you are doing something to kind of interact with this. Why Buck said fish will get in the way. You won't catch fish. Fish will get in the way of what you're doing because you're getting in the way of what's going on here with all this energy shit. But when you think of it that way, you study this stuff and you realize, well, these are all the same animals basically wherever they go. They don't know. There's nothing special about this lake except the same variables that dictate the way they behave everywhere else. So topography, you know, oh, we got a weed line. Well, weeds aren't special. I actually hate them. But they're brake lines, so they'll use it because it's a brake line. I do hate weeds with a burning passion, though. Totally unnecessary, and they actually ruin your spots. If you don't have weeds fish will set up on very specific topographic places. So like if you look at a bar like this, with the weeds on it, they'll get up there and then they scatter because they're moving up to something or off of something onto something, but then they hit that break line and it's one consistent break line that goes all the way down with all these little irregularities that they can sink up to, so they'll scatter along it. If you don't have the weeds, they won't get up on that shallow flat, so you might not see as many fish when you're fishing shallow like most people do, like throw weeds. But what they'll do is you might have one spot there, one spot there, one spot there, and one spot there. And every fish that comes onto that spot is going to go like, whoop, there's that rock, or there's that one stump on that break, or there's that, I don't know, some guy lost his car keys in the 60s and now, you know, it's the only thing different on the bottom. They're just all sitting there looking at a Volvo key set, but like, literally, it's that crazy. It's any differential, and you take away the weeds. No, I went on a tangent, but like, if you find places with naked topography, don't dismiss them. They're golden. They'll be some of the best spots you ever fish. Because once you figure out the spots where they do move up to when they move shallow, it won't be this fan out thing where they scatter on a weed line. There'll be like 4 muskies here, 2 there, 5 there, and a big one suspended off, and then the other 6 are sitting on that one. So remember that. If you can find lakes with darker water, number one, darker water is your friend anyway. If you can find lakes that don't have like some predominant weed line, just trust me, that's a blessing in disguise. And that's something I don't tell a lot of people because I don't like everybody knowing everything, but like, dude, I will tell you, weeds have ruined some of my best spots. Not ruined, but it made them more difficult because now the things that were very specific in dictating where the fish would orient themselves make them fan out. So now it's not as precise. But speaking of which, if you're wanting to cover specific spots like down on the break line, there really is no better way than using a Carolina rig. And like I said, why would you use something sinking to get something down that already sinks? I'm not saying it's not a bad idea to drag a worm across the bottom, but being able to use 2 competing forces where you're using the buoyancy against the weight to keep it up off the bottom, or so you can control it so you actually hit the bottom and then come off so you're not digging a trench, it's a really valuable thing to have in your arsenal. And I know it looks silly, but you won't look so silly when you catch big fish on it. So trust me on that, guys. Pat Donegan, peace out.